What's up everyone, I'm Englund and today I'm talking about the bands who changed my life and the bands that shaped me into the person I am today. For people who follow me, some of you know that I went sorta quick from listening to grunge to metal. But this video is going to be a little bit more extensive and I'm going to list the bands that somewhat changed the course of my music listening life. So I'm gonna start off with the band Twisted Sister, and this might seem like a totally random thing, but when I was about 5 to 6 years old, I listened to We're Not Gonna Take It like all the time. This is the first song I have actually some sort of a memory listening to back in that time, and it was just so catchy. I mean, I guess it was like the perfect song for a 5-year-old. That's actually probably the perfect description, really. Twisted Sister, metal for kids. Who's that? Anyway, I enjoy them a lot, and they also kind of brings me to the next band I listened to, which was Aerosmith. Do you see a pattern here? Another sort of easy listening heavy metal rock band. And to be quite honest, I don't think I had a genuine interest for music when I was young. It didn't really come to me until I was 13 years old. And both Aerosmith and Twisted Sister was before that time, so it was just really about easy listening, I guess. They had a bunch of really cool albums, but I think my actual first CD that I ever owned was Get a Grip. And that came out when I was 13 years old. It had songs like Eat It Rich, Living on the Edge, which has a really kick-ass video, by the way. Anyway, around this time, when I was 12, I started to go to rock shows, Aerosmith being the first one, and you know, I was just getting more and more into music at that time. So by then, when I was like in 5th or 6th grade, the other guys in my school started to learn guitar to impress on the girls in the class. So the natural thing would be that I would also pick up the guitar, and I also started skateboarding. And one of my childhood friends started growing long hair and showed me a band called Nirvana. And I remember picking up Nevermind on a sale, and boom. This was where my interest for music just exploded somehow. I became an avid fan of Nirvana, and I just listened to everything over and over. I basically crushed those albums just by listening to them over and over. I borrowed my older brother's electric guitar and started to try and learn guitar at that time. And this was around 1994, and just exactly when Kurt passed away. And that just sparked my interest a lot more. I started to get a hold of tab books, and I tried learning Nirvana songs on guitar. I found more bands, you know, like Soundgarden, Mudhoney, Tad, Melvins, and such, and just got more and more interested in music in general. For me, that was an amazing time. I started going to more live shows and scourged the live scene in Stockholm, and I remember the absolute most epic show I went to was sort of like a mini festival in 1995. It was a show with Soundgarden headlining, White Zombie, Mudhoney, Pennywise, Blind Melon, Kiss, Reef. What an excellent lineup. It was such an incredible show, and for a 14-year-old Ola, you can imagine it being super insane. It really blew my mind that music could be so much more when you experienced it live. You know, I just went to shows for the sake of going to shows. And I even went to shows with bands I didn't even like that much. I went to Green Day, I went to REM, just to enjoy the live experience. But yeah, Nirvana was the key that would open my love for music that I have today. I mean, I went out every Saturday browsing for CDs and just bought a shit ton of music. Basically going into the store, like checking out the album cover, like, oh, this looks like a cool album, and I bought it. That's how it worked. My dad, who worked in the music industry at the time, scored a Fender Mustang for a really good price, and that was the first guitar that I owned. At that time, I started middle school, and I found a new drummer friend who moved in from another town, and we started a band together. He was really into Swedish punk bands like De Lyckliga Kompisarna, Strebers, Deras Alma. So I started listening to that, and then we started to play together in a band, playing those songs. And even though we listened to that, you know, Swedish punk a lot, he also got me into a board game called Warhammer 40K, which is like you paint your own armies and you play against other people, and it's basically like a strategy game. And that became a hobby of mine. So at the time I was skateboarding, playing guitar, playing Warhammer. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, one Saturday when I was out browsing CDs, I found an album by a band called Bolt Thrower, which is a straight up reference to Warhammer 40K, the board game I was playing at the time. And their album covers were Warhammer related. So, I bought an album called For Victory, and whoa! First time I ever heard growling, and believe it or not, I was hooked. I loved it. This album is, I guess, the most important album for me when it comes to metal, because this was the entryway for me to start listening to my absolute favorite band ever, which is Pantera. I remember in school I had an after-school mentor who played a snippet of the song Walk, and I was like, shut that front door. I had never heard anything as brutal as that, and I was immediately hooked. I bought Far Beyond Driven from a friend in school for 20 crowns, that's like $2, and a bunch of cookies. I remember it so well. The album had a cracked case and I was just playing it over and over. And that album, it was just overly brutal. Basically, it had it all. It was fast, it was slow, it was brutal, it had incredible leads, incredible singing, and it was everything for me, basically. Pantera opened up for a lot of other bands in the same type of genre, so I started listening to Sepultura, Machine Head, Slayer, Testament, Entombed, and the band I was in kind of shifted towards playing metal rather than punk at that time, so we started playing covers of all those bands. And these type of bands from this time have influenced me incredibly in how I write music today. And you can probably hear that a lot in my music if you just go listen to my albums. And on my 16th birthday, I bought my second ever guitar, which was a Washburn Blackjack Dimebag 333 with a Bill Lawrence 500XL pickup in it. I remember it so well because it was on the evening. There was a store in Stockholm having an evening sale, and they had it on sale. It was perfect. And while I was listening to these bands, I bought a guitar instructional video of a long-haired dude named John Petrucci. I heard that video was the shit, so I went out and bought it. And I think it was because I wanted to become better at guitar quicker. And surrounding that time, his band Dream Theater just released a new album called Falling Into Infinity. And I remember checking it out, and while I really dug the music, I just could not stand the vocals. I was never really into clean singing vocals. I didn't like James' voice. But since I was an avid concert goer, I went together with my friend to a Dream Theater show in Stockholm 1997, and it was an incredible show. I was blown away by the performance, by seeing, John playing The Flight of the Bumblebee, and I was like, shit, this is like the next level guitar playing right there. So I went out, bought the Dream Theater catalog, and I started listening to their earlier albums, and I started practicing guitar for real. I would probably spend like 1 or 2 hours a day practicing guitar. I was never really about, 5 or 6 hours a day. That's just way too much. That became boring really quick. And I started listening to more guitar music, progressive metal like Steve Vai, Liquid Tension Experiment, Symphony X, Pain of Salvation, Evergrey, and so on. And I learned to love clean vocals in those styles. And around this time I also started recording myself more and more and utilize computer to record guitar sounds and program MIDI drums, for example. I was using Cakewalk 9, which was really shitty, by the way. I had so much latency issues, but even though I had those latency issues, I was just trying my best to record myself and just trying to make it as tight as I could. But it was a hassle when I had such a latency problem and all that. But it was still fun. It was me experimenting with recording myself at an early stage. And also my band Subside at the time had started recording demos of original music and started to play more venues in the town I grew up in. Now, while I was listening to all these metal bands, I found out about a band called Opeth, and they had released an album called Blackwater Park. And now this album totally blew me away because it had both growling and clean vocals. That I had never heard of before. Also, the album was just overly dark, really melodic, unlike the regular death metal that I was listening to. It had a much deeper calling in it and just felt more honest in a way. And I was getting more and more into production at this time and started venturing to guitar forums, where I joined a forum called the Andy Sneap Recording Forum. I was also part of the John Petrucci Forum. But the Andy Sneap Forum was basically a forum for up-and-coming producers. Andy Sneap mixed my favorite sounding albums of all time, Testament the Gathering and Nevermore's Dead Heart in a Dead World. When I heard those albums, I just couldn't believe how incredibly awesome they sounded. The Gathering had an overly brutal sound. It sounded so violent and full of pure, raw energy, while Dead Heart and Dead World had one of the best rhythm guitar tones I've ever heard. At this time, I became almost obsessed with rhythm guitar tone. I remember from trying out a lot of amplifiers that I ended up with an Englund Savage that would become my main amplifier for 7 years. And I also played an Ibanez Universe PVH at the time. Damn, it's a lot of talking. Okay, Andy Sneap Forum, Andy Sneap Forum. Anyway, this Andy Sneap Forum was probably the best place I could ever have found at that time. And it became my go-to place to find new and amazing music, and a place where I could learn and exchange knowledge with other guys just like me. And some of the guys that were part of that forum that you might know of were Ermin Hamidovic, Glenn Fricker, Joey Sturgis, James Murphy. A bunch of really cool talents came from there, which is awesome. So during this time I also revisited my love for death metal and found out about 2 Canadian bands, Cryptopsy or Cryptopsy or whatever, and Gorguts. And I listened a shit ton to these bands, and Gorguts really had some amazing songwriting ideas that even today sounds super modern, and it sounds like it's almost from the future. It was chaotic and technical death metal at its finest, in my opinion. After this, I would say that my interest to find new bands and music has been somewhat stale. I mean, of course, I've found new and amazing bands that I love, but the ones that I'm talking about in this video are probably the ones that have meant the most to me. Mainly because it's bands who have formed me to the person I am today. It goes very much in line with me growing up as a person, you know, from being a 14 to 25-year-old, still trying to find himself. These bands have really helped me on the way. And it's incredible to sit down and count back the bands and how important they have been for you in the past. And as you become older, you become more nostalgic. And people were always saying, like to me when I was younger, that it was better in the past, referring to, you know, 70s and 80s bands, and I just didn't agree with them. But I get it now though. It's because that was the time they started getting into music. I mean, for them, it was the perfect time. While for me, 90s metal is the best because it was when I was the most receptive to music. And to this day, Pantera is still my favorite band. And listening back to all these albums I mentioned, it really takes me back. I mean, it makes me feel like I'm a teenager again. But Pantera in general is still the band for me. They are the band that represents me the best, I would say. But you guys already knew that. So there you go. That's my little video for you. I'm sharing a Spotify list down below if you want to check out some of the songs. I picked a couple of my favorite ones from all these bands that I mentioned. You can click down and listen to it there. And let me know in the comments section what band is your band, the band that means the most to you right now. Okay? Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please put a thumbs up and subscribe. And see ya. Is that a bro fist? Did I just steal the bro fist? No, this is my thing. Okay, see you guys. Ola, the racist Freemason guy with this. Bye.